So this week's Torah portion comes to us from Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 32 and verse 3, extending through Bereshit, Genesis 36 and verse 43. The parsha is called Vayishlach. Vayishlach. And he sent. And you can hear it in there, Vayishlach. You can hear the Hebrew word there for apostle, shalach. Shalach. Vayishlach, shalach means one who is sent. One who is sent. This is a great Torah portion, prophetically speaking. Of course, we're going to see now that Esau meets Yaakov after a period of absence. Within this week's Torah portion, we're going to see Esau comes to meet Yaakov. Of course, this portion includes the famous wrestling with Elohim, Yaakov and Esau meeting, and then the captivity, the abduction of Dinah, and Yaakov returning to Bethel, and the death of Rachel. There is a lot to talk about. There's a lot that relates to us, of course, because Yahweh's word is alive. It is alive. But this week's Torah portion, Esau meets Yaakov, and he's been absent from Yaakov. Can anyone tell me how many years? 22 years. 22 years. This week's Torah portion speaks about Yaakov's trouble. And how many of us, when we were regular Sunday attendees, we'd talk about Jacob's trouble and the great tribulation. And how long would we say that was going to be, Jacob's trouble? And we'd hear this term, oh, Jacob's trouble, we're going to be in Jacob's trouble. And we threw it around, I know I did, but really had no idea what it really meant from a scriptural point of view, from a scriptural perspective. Oh, I knew what it meant from a dogmatic religious it was, Jacob's trouble was when I was going to get raptured and everybody else was going to be left behind to go through this terrible time of 7 years of tribulation. Now, as I studied the word more, I realized that, well, firstly, there isn't 7 years of tribulation. It's only 42 months, and 42 is twice 21 times 2, right? If my mathematics is correct. And we find now that Yaakov's trouble, this is the Torah portion where that phrase is coined. And then later on in Yirmiyahu chapter 30, we'll see the prophet Jeremiah speaks of this phrase again. So if we want to know about Jacob's trouble, Yaakov's trouble, then this is the portion for us. We will learn about how to get through Yaakov's trouble, how to get through the great tribulation. This parsha is going to lay bare the overwhelming terror that seizes Yaakov. And we know that even the Jewish rabbis said that when the Intifada happened in 2000, the rabbis came to the Kotel, the Western Wall, and they said, this is the time of Yaakov's trouble. And you remember all the suicide bombings and everything that happened in 2000, and from that time on, they're like, this must be the time of Yaakov's trouble. So the prophet Jeremiah says in the 7th verse of the 30th chapter, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Yaakov's trouble. It's the end of the age. We're going to see in this week's Torah portion what that means. It's about a division of camps, a division of houses into two companies. Judah and Ephraim are going to be wrestling with the composition of Yahweh. So it doesn't surprise me at this time that we've got people trying to infiltrate and sway brethren away from truth. Doesn't surprise me at all that Sister Brenda stood up and said what she needed to say. Verse 10 of Jeremiah chapter 30, therefore fear not, O my Eved Yaakov, says Yahweh, neither be discouraged. Don't be discouraged, O Israel, for see, I will save you from afar, and your Zerah seed from the land of their exile. That's us We are in our exile now. And Yaakov shall shuv. Shuv comes from, it's the root word of teshuvah. Yaakov, the house of Jacob, the flock of Jacob, they're going to repent. And the biblical term of repent means return to Torah. We just sung it. And they shall be in rest. They shall be in the Shabbat. They shall be in the Shabbat, and they shall be in shalom, and no one shall make him afraid. For I am with you, says Yahweh, to save you. Though I make a full end of all nations where I have scattered you, yet will I not make a full end of you. What's Yahweh going to do with the nations that he's scattered? Because this false prophetic voice that goes out through America, that America is in end time prophecy, and that America, the USA, is the eagle and is going to be saved. And I mean, Yahweh says that any nation outside of Israel, which is only his nation, I'm not talking about Zionist, the state right now, that will be destroyed so that the biblical Israel can be raised up. What does Yahweh say about the nations? For I will make an end of all nations. All means all, and it means all. All nations, where I have scattered you, yet will I not make a full end of you, but I will correct you or discipline you in measure, and will not leave you altogether unpunished. Will we be affected by the destruction that comes upon the nations of our exile? For sure and for certain. So this is the time of preparation, not the time of listening to foolish voices that this is Babylon, that this is the prophetic eagle. I mean, and oh my goodness, it's out there. And people are grasping for straws because it makes you feel good, but it's not reality. It is not reality. The reality is that Yahweh is going to raise up biblical Israel. But first of all, the counterfeit state will be dealt with. And Yeshua spoke about that in the parable of the fig tree. Verse 17 of Jeremiah 30. For I will restore health to you. Restore health to you in the scriptures is a phrase that means an end of your exile. If you're in sickness, you're in exile. But if health is restored to you, that means it's the end of your exile. Because sickness is associated with departure from Torah. Brings sickness. And I will heal you of your wounds, says Yahweh, because they called you an outcast, saying, this is Zion, whom no man seeks after. This, says Yahweh, see, I will turn back the exile of Yaakov's tents. So get your tents ready. And have rachamim on his dwelling places. And the city shall be rebuilt upon its own heap. And the palace shall remain in its right place. But look what verse 24 says. In the latter days, then you will understand this. In the latter days. Chapter 31 verse 6 says, for there shall be a day that the called out Netzarim or Notzrim, that's another word for followers of Yeshua, who watch out on the mount of Ephraim shall teruah, shall cry with the sound of a shofar, arise and let us go up to Zion, to Yahweh our Elohim. Yaakov's trouble is in our prophetic future, and in the last days you shall understand it. There's a lot to cover today. Bereshit 32 and verse 3. And Yaakov sent malachim, angels. Now these angels would have been from where? When did he last have an encounter with a lot of angels? Ascending and descending. He sent the heavenly malachim before him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, so shall you speak to my master Esau. Your Eved Yaakov says this, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. So let's dig into this time of Yaakov's trouble. It actually refers to, not doctrinally, not religiously, but in the Bible, in the scriptures, Yaakov's trouble refers to two 21-year times in Yaakov's life. Two 21-year cycles in his life. That's the biblical definition of Yaakov's trouble. And then from there, you'll see that Yahweh uses that as a foundation to build upon the 210 years cycles from that. It's amazing. Which will be national. So the two 21-year fulfillment cycles are the foundational definition in the scriptures of Yaakov's trouble. 210 is a multiplication, 21 times 10. And that is going to deal with national issues of trouble and restoration. So we're going to see this now played out with Yaakov's fulfillment and then a national fulfillment. Two 21-year cycles, and then we'll get into the 210-year cycles. Let's look at the first trouble. Yaakov was in trouble when he sojourned with Laban. When Yaakov arrived in Haran, he was a pauper. He was a pauper because en route, he was robbed of the dowry that his father Yitzhak had given him for a bride. He was robbed by a son of Esau called Eliphaz. And we mentioned him when we dealt the other week with who? He did, exactly. We mentioned that, and we also mentioned him in association with Amalek and the Amalekites. Exactly. So he was robbed by a son of Esau called Eliphaz in exchange for his life. Now that's recorded in the book of Yasher, chapter 29, verse 30. Now how long was Yaakov's first trouble? 21 years. 7 years plus 7 years, and he was released after he had served 6 years, and in the 7th year he went free. Yaakov was in fact an indentured servant. He was a bondservant. If we rebel against Yahweh, like Yaakov, then a set period of bondage will follow for us. A set period of bondage will always follow if you rebel against Yahweh. It's in Yahweh's Torah, and we can't get around it. It was a time of servitude as a bondservant for 3 rest year cycles. That's what Yaakov was in. 3 rest year cycles, 21 years of servitude. The time of bondage is directly connected to the time of the bondservants. And what do the apostles say that we are? We are to be bondservants. So we can expect to see this cycle in our life. I do not believe in the imminent return of Yeshua. The Bible does not teach an imminent return of Yeshua. That's what Rav Shiliach Shaul was addressing to the Thessalonians. He was dealing with that very issue. There is no imminent return. Things have to happen in order for him to return. Let's continue on. It's very interesting because when Yaakov began to return to Canaan, he wrestled with the Malach, the angel at Peniel. And we see that in this week's Torah Parsha, chapter 32, verse 24. And that is when we find that Yaakov's name is given as Israel. And from Peniel, Israel went to Sukkot, where he stayed for 1.5 years, according to Yasher, chapter 33, verse 4. So we better get used to going to Sukkot, because prophetically, that we're going to be in those tents for at least 1.5 years, according to the prophetic shadow picture. It's very interesting on a sod level. The numbers 22 and 21 are very significant. In Gematria, 22 is the number of light, and it appears 22 times, funny enough, in the Gospel of John. 21 is indicative of bondage to sin prior to a great release, which of course is depicted in the number 22, light. Darkness coming into light, 21 into 22. These two numbers represent a progression from hard labor and bondage caused by us following the flesh. So the last generation will experience 42 months of tribulation, of course 42 being double 21, meaning this is going to be double the tribulation that Yaakov went through. Double the tribulation. It's going to be a great tribulation. Does that make sense? There's 21 recorded sins of Israel in the book of Numbers. It tells you the 21 sins of Israel between the Exodus and the Jordan. It's very interesting. Now you take this 21 and now you work into a national level and you find it turning from 21 into 21 times 10, 210-year cycle. There's a prophetic breach between the messianic line and the birthright. And that's what we're dealing with right now. It's a breach. We are living in the time of a breach between king and kingdom. And the king would come through what line? Judah. And Judah would birth the line of the king. Now, the biggest deception on the world right now, the biggest deception, and it will play out into the Great Tribulation, it plays out to exactly what you just spoke about, is that in 1948, Theodore Herzl and his minions set up a state, and instead of calling it what they could have legally called it, the state of Judah, which would have been a stretch because most of them were Khazarian converts from the Caspian region, they in fact changed it to be called the state of Israel. So 1955 was a very embarrassing year for pastors in America. An extremely embarrassing year. Why? 1955. Pastors across America had omelets all over their face because their predictions failed. The 7-year tribulation from 1948 to 1955 did not materialize because the nation of Israel that was invented in 1948 was not the biblical fulfillment of prophecy of Israel. It was a creation of Judah by Khazarian converts from the Caspian Sea region, and therefore every single Bible prophecy has failed and will continue to fail from there. We have to realize that there right now is a breach between Judah and Ephraim. Judah has done the work that they were destined and created to do, which was to bring forth the king. But Judah will not ever bring forth the kingdom, because the kingdom can only be brought forth by Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. There is a breach, and that plays out through Scripture. If you don't understand that, then Bible prophecy will continue to escape you. And you will eventually get sucked into the big deception that Judah is trying to hold both birthright and kingdom, and it is illegal. Does that make sense? It's a serious thing. It's the most serious teaching there is. And it's not popular because it's not going to be funded by all the big lobbies, and it's not going to get you on GLC and everything, because, people don't like it when you start telling biblical truth. So there is a breach between the messianic line and the birthright. It's a breach between king and kingdom. That's the reality that we're living in today. So Yaakov, Israel, they went down into Mitzrayim. How long were they in Mitzrayim, Egypt? 210 years in Egypt. So Israel, on a national level, their first trouble was 210 years as a corporate nation, which directly parallels Jacob's 21-year time of trouble. Since we're dealing with the time of trouble on a greater level of fulfillment, the time frame is longer, but it's still characterized by the number 21. I like looking at all of your faces. So if Yaakov had how many tribulations? How many troubles? 2. So how many troubles should we see on a national level? So our first trouble is Israel goes down into Mitzrayim for 210 years. Now watch this. Israel's second time of trouble was a 210-year time of trouble, and of course directly parallels Jacob's 21-year separation from Joseph. Jacob's second trouble was when he separated from Joseph. 21 years. Was he in trouble? Was he in anguish? Was his very innards troubled for his son Joseph? That lasted 21 years. I think, personally, that would be a greater trouble than the first trouble, which was 21 years with Laban. Because of those of you that have sons or children, to be without your beloved son and to think that he is dead, but you don't know, that would be trouble. He dealt with that, his second trouble, for 21 years. That kind of stuff would turn your guts inside out every single night. No matter what joy you had in your life, no matter what bitter happiness you had on that day, you'd still be miserable and in trouble because you've lost your son. You think that is trouble. And parents, grandparents, you know what I'm talking about. So we see Jacob's 2 troubles. We're going to see now national Israel's 2 troubles. First national Israel trouble, 210 years in Egypt. Israel's second trouble was, of course, began at the death of Solomon in 931 before the Common Era, with the breach between Israel and Judah. The northern kingdom lasted for 210 years. Isn't that amazing? 210 years until the fall of Samaria in 721 before the Common Era. Now, during this time, the tribes of Joseph were separated from Judah. Does that follow the pattern? Was Joseph in the first? Was he separated from Judah? Yeah, he was in slavery. In fact, Judah was the one that said, put him there, sell him, right? Let's make some money of him. Now, what was the reason for the revolt between the northern and southern kingdom? Let's tax them. Who said that? Judah. Same thing, right? Tribe of Judah, southern kingdom said, yeah, you know what? Yeah, my father, he taxed you this much. I'm going to tax you more. Same principle. It follows the pattern exactly. During this time, the tribes of Joseph were separated from Judah for 210 years, just as Jacob had been separated from Joseph for 21 years. Now the tribes of Joseph were separated from Judah for 210 years. Judah was the one who had suggested selling Joseph to the slave traders, and it's not a surprise then that Rehoboam, a Judahite, made the ill-advised decision to raise taxes further, which caused a separation between the tribes of Judah and Joseph. It's amazing. So the divided kingdom lasted exactly 210 years. Wow. Now we go to Melachim Bet, 2 Kings, chapter 18 through chapter 20, and we find now that we're going to find that there's a prophetic pattern for the repair of the breach. And the repair of the breach between the northern and the southern kingdom was done under whose rule? Hezekiah. And this took place 10 years after the fall of Samaria, or 220 years after the beginning of the breach. So this follows the 210-year cycle of Joseph's separation from his brethren, but it took another 10 years to heal the breach. So in Hezekiah's day, the pattern was national in scope, so the numbers reflect a longer cycle. I mean, it's just amazing. This is how the Bible tells us what we're to expect with Jacob's trouble. Not some hairy-fairy 7-year tribulation. Oh, it's Jacob's trouble, and listening to rabbis at the Western Wall. I like knowing what the Scripture says and where it comes from, because that's solid stuff for me to put my foot on, and to know that there is a division between kingdom and king right now. And you can't say that Ephraim was the one that was supposed to bring forth the king, because that's a lie. That's not true. And you can't say on the other foot that Judah is going to set up a kingdom, a Israel, and say it's true, because it's not. It's the deception that everybody's following, because nobody's got the backbone to stand up and warn the sheep, because they're concerned about, oh, well, maybe I won't get tithes and people might leave, and oh, my ministry, and they'll say I'm anti-Shemitic. No, you love the Jews as you love Ephraim, as you love all nations, creeds, and colors. Because Yahweh created all. But that doesn't mean that you don't speak truth. Can you tell I'm passionate about the subject? All right, back to work. So, what we see now is 210 also correlates to the captivity of the northern tribes in the second Mitzrayim now in the world. Because the northern tribes then were scattered into the nations, right? So now you're going to find that 210-year cycle in our captivity in the world. And the world is Egypt, right? This is our second captivity, if you will, in Egypt. So the captivity of the northern tribes began in 745 before the Common Era, with the loss of the 3 eastern tribes. Now 12 times 210 years, 12 representing ultimately there's going to be a collection of all 12 tribes. So 12 times 210 years from this date takes us to, who's a mathematician, Greg? 1776. Weird, huh? The establishment of the USA. But I thought you said USA isn't in Bible prophecy. One camp is hidden in a safe place. Why did Jacob divide his camps? Because he wanted to keep a camp back in case the first camp was destroyed by Esau. And that's exactly the pattern. Yahweh has divided his camps. Everybody is always known of Judah, but Ephraim has been hidden in the nations. And from 745, before the Common Era, we find the 210-year cycle brings us to 1776, the time of our captivity and our hiding place, of course, the USA. One camp hidden in a safe place. The 13th period of 210 years would bring us from 1776 to 1986. And it's a virtual repeat of the 210 years from 931 before the Common Era to 721 before the Common Era. You may recall that what happened in 931? Solomon died. So there's a repeat of that cycle. It's amazing. The house of Israel revolted against the Davidic monarchy over the issue of high taxes. What are we dealing with right now? I mean, it is going to cause It follows the pattern exactly. You can say, oh man, you're just, a Bible teacher talking about tax. Seriously. Somebody sent me something this week and it was a banknote of Zimbabwe and it was like $10 trillion. So you can go and buy a bag of flour. We're not far from that. High taxes without representation. 1 Kings 12. The same thing occurred in 1776. And we're now at that end of that 13th cycle. And we're going to have that revolt too. In fact, we have a political party called the Tea Party. I mean, that's a new invention. Representing the very idea of revolt right now. The American colonies revolted against the British. The Northern Kingdom revolted against the Southern Kingdom. And of course, Judah wanted to sell Joseph for money. Now, Yeshua came, we all know, as a lion from the tribe of Judah the first time. Why? It was in order to secure his throne rights as Messiah. That's why he came. It was in order to secure his throne rights as Messiah. He comes the second time, not to Judah, but to the tribes of Joseph in order to secure his birthright, which is the kingdom. That's why we are dealing with the Middle East conflict. That's why there is such lies and deception going on right now. That's why. We live in an amazing time. And that Yahweh's opened my eyes to this is amazing. Amazing to see where I have come from. And it's not by anything but the presence of the Ruach HaKodesh and being in the Word. In Revelation 11, talks about the outer court. The Gentiles would trample the outer court for 42 months, 21 times 2. The temple with the inner court is going to be preserved, however, is it not? The outer court is breached and is occupied by the enemy and is a part of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. The outer court is the court for the people of Israel as opposed to the court of the priests. Even in Yeshua's time, there was always an inner court and an outer court. And it was the outer court that caused all the trouble, right? But it was the inner court that were protected. What does this mean? It means that if you haven't entered into Yahweh's Melchizedek priesthood, and if you're not properly set apart and consecrated through faith, and walk into this fullness that what we've been talking about in the book of the covenant, you'll be overwhelmed. You'll be overwhelmed. Literally, you'll be overwhelmed in the Great Tribulation. There'll be too many voices. Oh, book of the law. Oh, Judah. Oh, Ephraim. Oh, Levites up on the temple. Yes, go, everyone. Let's go to Israel. Oh, no, let's all go to Oklahoma. Oh, come on. You'll be overwhelmed. Oh, no, they're sacrificing on the temple. Oh, maybe I should go there. Oh, what is this? Oh, hang on, let me get on the internet. Oh, bloody heck, the internet doesn't work anymore. Yeah. I think I get more eccentric week by week. But they'll be overwhelmed during the tribulation. You'll be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, the infidels, and the uncircumcised of heart. The freedom and safety that lazy and lukewarm believers have enjoyed in the outer court, those who refuse to go into the inner court of the priestly service in the book of the covenant, which is Torah, takes maturity, it takes responsibility. It's about to be removed. The protection the lazy believer has taken for granted is about to be removed to shock him into returning to the sheep by repenting or, Brenda, going over to the goats by apostatizing. And so they're going to set you up. You're either going to repent or they're going to bring things in to cause you to go over to the goats and apostatize. That's why Brenda had the word of admonition for you. Because it's all about big numbers, it's all about more money, and that's insane. We have to stay the course. We have to stay the course. Do not see with the eyes, but hear the still small voice. That's it. I am so thankful that Yahweh has preserved us together all these years. It's amazing. So the second Yaakov's trouble, just to throw off all the messianic timelines, Joseph was sold, and Yaakov's second trouble again was 21 years he was separated from his beloved son. And Yaakov's trouble, the issue is always going to be what? The issue in Jacob's trouble is always going to be one thing: birthright. So on the Zumi tablets, it was recorded that if a man took 2 wives, then he would lose the inheritance. So Laban didn't want him to get the inheritance, so he offered Leah as a wife because he knew that Jacob would want to marry Rachel. Thus, he would have 2 wives, and he would no longer be a threat of taking Laban's inheritance. I'm going to have you say this because this is very important. Let's say it in here.
What was on this article was that those little gods that Rachel took, the father would give that to the son to claim the inheritance. So in case Laban died, if there was ever a dispute over the land or the birthright, he could take his father's gods in and say, look, my father gave me these. This is proof that the inheritance belongs to me. And that, in theory, is why Rachel took him and hid him, because of what Laban did, making him marry Leah first and Rachel second, thus losing the birthright, and Rachel was trying to get that for her husband.
Which explains why then Laban had the pillars, had them draw the pillars.
But not only that, taking, 3 days to trap him down. Right. That would have cost a lot of money. Right. For little gods. Why? Yeah. Doesn't make any sense.
Because it was a birthright. Excellent. And what was what was Joseph given? He was given the birthright coat, the birthright tunic, which is why the sons hated him without a cause. So any time you're dealing with Yaakov's trouble, it's always going to be about birthright. Birthright, which is kingdom, which is land, which is the name Israel. So Yaakov's trouble, the issue is birthright always. So bring that forward to our day, and now we've got a Jewish company that gets billions of dollars, and what's it called? Birthright. So, restoration of the birthright seed, that's what's really going on in the prophetic timetable. And Joseph silently suffers as he did before in Egypt while the world looks elsewhere, right? Today, the world is looking elsewhere for the birthright when Joseph, Ephraim, is suffering silently in the exile and nobody's looking. They're dead. Well, they're 10 lost tribes. They're dead, 10 lost tribes. The birthright is the land. 2 camps of people. Jacob had 2 camps of people. We've got the 2 houses of Israel, hidden in the nations. The very purpose of the exile is to prepare for the full restoration of all biblical Israel. Exile is always understood as a temporary measure of discipline for a set period of time. The only difference between first covenant Israel and new covenant Israel is that new covenant Israel has wandered for 40 jubilees, not 40 years. 40 times 50, 2,000 years instead of a mere 40 years we've been wandering. And Kepha Aleph says in chapter 5, verse 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your enemy, Satan, as a roaring lion walks around on the earth, seeking whom he can devour. Resist him steadfast in the emunah, faith, knowing that the same afflictions in your Israelite brothers that are all over the olam. Satan is looking for the family of Jacob, the flock of Jacob, Israel, but the camps have been divided for the preservation of the brethren. That's the reality. In Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30, when you are in distress, that would be Yaakov's trouble, and all these things have come upon you in the latter days, when you turn to Yahweh your Elohim and obey his voice, for Yahweh your Elohim is a merciful Elohim. He will not forsake you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant of your fathers which he swore to them. He will not forget the book of the covenant which he swore to them. That's what it's talking about. It's amazing stuff. Yaakov's trouble deals with 21 years. It happened twice. Yaakov went into trouble, and Yaakov's trouble twice. Then it is fulfilled on a national level twice with the 210-year cycles. And brethren, this then spills over into what we're dealing with today. As we go through the portion now, we're going to come to something that happens to Dinah. The Dinah incident. And this all is just building and building and building to, I just don't know what, but it is extremely unnerving. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to track the tribal traits of Levi and Simeon. From the Russian Revolution to the making of the first vaccines, to fluoride, to the atomic bomb, all the way to the Boston bomb. The traditional interpretation, why are you laughing, Dane? The traditional interpretation for this passage in the Torah is one of rape, deception, and cruelty, right? But the reality is, Simeon and Levi will kill anyone who may interfere with what they mistakenly believe is their birthright. And they'll find legal cause to justify it. The Russian Revolution, the making of vaccines, fluoride, the atomic bomb, all the way to the Boston bomb. Bereshit 34, verse 1. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she bore to Yaakov, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, Tsar of the country, saw her, he took her. The Hebrew word there is lachach, and it means to seize, to snatch, to carry off, to take captive with vengeance. He didn't just take her, and he shakab. He lay with her violently. And he defiled her. Verse 3, and his being did cleave to Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov, and he loved the young girl. Oh yeah, she was young. She was 7. This despicable trait is common in the seed of the serpent. Muhammad, the founder of Islam, he picked up on this trait. He married Aisha when he was 54 years old, Muhammad was. And Aisha, she was 6 years old. And he consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. Seed of the serpent. And the sons, in verse 13 of chapter 34, the sons of Yaakov answered Shechem, and Hamor is his Abba deceitfully. The Hebrew word there is mirma, because she had defiled Tamei, Dinah, their sister. Now we go to verse 25. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, of course that's the most painful day of swelling after Brit Milah, when the men were still sore, that the 2 sons of Yaakov, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took each man his sword, and they came upon the city boldly, and they killed all the males. Remember Bereshit, chapter 37, verse 19, when Joseph is in the pit? Let's kill him. And who was it that Joseph left in prison? Simeon. Why do you think? It was most probably Simeon who said, let's kill him. Yet Reuben was the one that returned to the pit. It's a trait. It's a tribal trait, and it's with us today. And we are the recipients of it in our water, in the vaccines. And it's all about trying to kill those who have the legitimate birthright. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's Bayit and went out. So the part of the body that was used to violate Dinah now becomes the source of his own punishment, does it not? Now, turn into your King James, in your King James version, let's turn to the book of Judith. They took that out 110 years ago. Who took that out? Do you remember? That was in the King James version for so many years. I think it was the American Bible Society. They removed the book of Judith, thanks to them. But in Judith chapter 9, verse 2, which was in the original King James version, still in the Catholic canon, I believe, Yahweh, Elohim of my father Simeon. Listen to this. You put a sword into his hand. Yahweh put a sword into Simeon's hand to take vengeance upon the foreigners who had immodestly loosened the maiden's girdle, shamefully exposed her thighs, disgracefully violated her body, and polluted her womb. This is Judith chapter 9, verse 2. This they did, enough said, it shall be done. Now in Devarim, in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28, Shechem would have had to marry her according to the Torah if he had committed the crime of taking a virgin, right? He then would have been prohibited from ever divorcing her, and Yaakov should have been compensated. The offense did, however, bring guilt upon the whole community. But more happened. Back to Judith. Therefore, you had their rulers slaughtered, and you covered with their blood the bed in which they lay deceived, because they lay confined to their beds because of the circumcision. The same bed that he felt the shame of their own deceiving. You smote the slaves together with their princes, and the princes together with their servants. Their wives you handed over to plunder, and their daughters to captivity. And all the spoils you divided among your favored sons, who burned with zeal for you. And in their abhorrence of the defilement of their kinswoman, called on you for help. O Yahweh, my Yahweh, Shema, me also a widow, Judith says. It's you who were the author of those events and of what preceded and followed them. The present also and the future you have planned. Make my deceitful words bring wound and bruise on those who have planned cruel things against your Brit, your covenant. So this is interesting. It gives us the full scope of how now Judith petitions Yahweh, and she recounts that Yahweh had actually been very much involved in this Dinah incident. The author of Judith apparently feels no moral inconsistency in having her pray for divine help in practicing deceit. reflecting back to our Torah parsha, she sees that Yahweh was with Simeon and Levi, even though they practiced deceit when slaying the men of the city. Very interesting. Because in the book of Yasher, in chapter 32, 33, and 34, it's recorded that Shechem kidnapped Dinah and violated her. Now, Yasher describes how Shechem and his men had actually broken the 7 Noahide laws given to all mankind: kidnapping, robbery, rape, and bloodshed. Now, Yasher records that men from the city had actually changed their minds and they intended to kill Dinah. And after they had healed from their circumcision, they were going to slay the sons of Yaakov. Simeon and Levi, when hearing of the plan to slay them, actually swore a neder. A neder is a vow where you swear by Yahweh's name that not a remnant would be left alive in the whole city. So now we're getting the full picture of what really happened. According to everything that now we've looked at, that Yahweh was with Simeon and Levi, that Shechem and the city men actually planned to kill Dinah and the sons of Yaakov, that Shechem committed kidnapping, robbery, rape, and bloodshed. He didn't follow any Torah rule of compensation of taking a young virgin and compensating Yaakov. We find now that Shechem, in fact, had to be killed. He had to be killed because the Torah of violence, which is in Shemot 21:16, demands it. He had to be killed.
Why do they refer to them as instruments of cruelty?
We'll get to that because it's true. But Shechem had to be killed. The whole city had to be slaughtered because the Torah of the neder, the law of the vow, is don't swear falsely. Don't make a rash oath and you have to fulfill your neder. So they made a vow to Yahweh that they would slaughter the whole city. They had to fulfill it. So now you're getting more of a picture. But what was your...
Because Yaakov, he says you are instruments of cruelty.
Yaakov says to Levi and Shimeon that they are instruments of cruelty, because that is now a tribal trait that is going to be manifested and manifested and manifested, because somebody who is cruel is going to be undiscerning. They're going to be hot to temper, and they will make quick judgments without considering another person. And now you're going to see what happens with Simeon in the wilderness. If you turn to Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 1, you're going to find that we have the first census of Israel. Now, in the first census of Israel, we see that the third largest tribe is actually Simeon. 59,300 counted of the tribe of Simeon. Now, 25 chapters later, Yahweh demands that there be a second census. Why? What happened between Numbers 1 and Numbers 26? Now, when you look at the census figures of Numbers 26, you find that Simeon is no longer the third largest tribe. Simeon is, in fact, the smallest tribe. Demographics show us something happened. Demographics is that there's usual growth. And the growth should be in line with what we see in the statistics of Numbers 1 and Numbers 26. But we see a drop in 37,100 Simeonites. 37,100 Simeonites gone. Well, what could have happened? Pinchas, Phineas. Phineas was what? A Levite. What did Yaakov say about Simeon and Levi? Pinchas, a Levite, unilaterally executes a Simeonite prince, does he not? The two most violent tribes are at daggers drawn, and a civil war ensues in the wilderness. It's a civil war between the tribes. The census records point to Simeon walking out. There's nothing in the Torah that says they had to stay in the wilderness. They just wouldn't enter the promised land. Simeon, the census results tell us that Simeon walked out. Because it doesn't say that all of those that were killed in the plague were of 21, 20 and older. It says it was men, women, and children. So that doesn't account for 37,100. Simeon walked out. They left. Done. You guys, you want to hang out in the wilderness with this promise? We're out of here. There is a civil war between the tribes. The census figures show that the tribes of Ephraim and Naphtali also, many of them left with Simeon. Because if you look at the census results, Naphtali and Ephraim, they don't grow either. They drop considerably. They left with Simeon. Second census, Numbers 26. Look at Numbers 1 and Numbers 26, Bamidbar 1 and 26. Figure out the numbers and you'll get your census results. And you'll see that Ephraim and Naphtali must have left with Simeon. Because the second census shows that the entire tribes of Manasseh, Asher, Issachar, and Benjamin, they stayed with Moshe Rabbeinu. That's normal demographic growth. It's fascinating. Yahweh directed the Levites' propensity to violence into becoming a tribe of butchers, killing, cutting, and sacrificing innumerable animals under the book of the law system of animal sacrifices. He's like, you know what? These guys are just, they're instruments of cruelty. I'm going to put them to good use in the book of the law, right? So be careful, because if there isn't a sacrificial system up on the altar, and you've got Simeon and Levi out there in the generations, they could get into a whole bunch of trouble if they're not put to good use. Yahweh put them to good use, but they're not doing much good right now, and that's why we're running into the problems that we're running in today. But where did Simeon go? Because they walked out. If they abandoned, well, again, turn in your King James Version to 1 Maccabees chapter 14, verse 16. The King Jimmy. And this is the copy of the letter which the Spartans sent. The chief magistrates and the city of the Spartans sends greetings to Simeon, the chief priest, and the elders and the priests and the rest of the Jewish people, our kinsmen. So the Spartans were the Simeonites that sent greetings to their Jewish people, kinsmen. The Spartans of ancient Greece. The Spartans were known to be descended from a people non-native to Greece who had arrived there in ancient times. The Spartans were famous as being the most combative armies of the Greek city-states. It was the Spartan king Leonidas with 300 elite bodyguards who held back the army of the Persian Empire at the Battle of Thermopylae. They had a rigorous martial community which was very different from the Greek city-states. The tribe of Simeon would be expected to live by the sword and be a martial community wherever they settled. Simeon is the Spartans. Isn't that amazing? That was 1 Maccabees chapter 14, verse 16. So now let's deal with what they're up to nowadays. Levi and Simeon, because they're not being put to good use. Simeonite, Oppenheimer. invented the atomic bomb. Levite, fluoride. With Oppenheimer, a Simeonite, fluoride was the key chemical in atomic bomb production. Massive quantities, millions of tons, were essential for the manufacture of bomb-grade uranium. When was fluoride introduced to the water system in the United States of America? Why? Because they had such surplus amounts of fluoride in the making of atomic weapons that they had to get rid of it in the water supply was the only way. Then, with government funding, they then went to the Dental Association to sell it as strengthening your teeth. And that's how they did it. But the fact is, it was a Simeonite, Oppenheimer, who invented the atomic bomb, and fluoride, a natural byproduct of it, was then diverted into the water system. Simeonites trying to kill the birthright. Karl Marx, a Levite, wrote the Communist Manifesto. Sigmund Freud, the father of all CIA, Mossad, and Stasi psyops. Anything the CIA, Mossad, or the Stasi did with the psyops, all from Sigmund Freud. Dr. Salk, a Simeonite, the inventor of vaccine poisons. Blolstein, Amoco oil, a Simeonite. And then Levi, the inventor of the smallest pure fusion bomb. The last test date of the smallest pure fusion bomb? Boston. That was a small pure fusion bomb, and it was a test. And if you look at the footage, there is more footage of that than anything else. You'll see all the special ops people walking around with the skull on their baseball caps, in the fatigues with the ear. I mean, right there. And who did they blame it on? Who did they blame the Boston bomb on? The Chechens, right? Oh, I wonder why. Because Chechnya was a republic of Russia. And when the Second World War began, who did the Chechens side with? Russia? No, the Germans. Why? They sided against Russia because they hated what the Bolsheviks, the Simeonites, the Levites had done to the Russian imperial family. It's insane what is going on out there right now. Because the Russian imperial family of Tsar Nicholas II were pious Orthodox Christians. But Levi and Simeon were sent to end their dynasty. After the killing off of the Tsar, Levite Jacob Schiff was chairman of Kuhn and Loeb Bank. He financed the Bolshevik Revolution. A Levite. It was the tribal renegade Jacob Schiff who brought Leon Troitsky, who was born Lev Bronstein, also a Levite, to New York in February 1916. Troitsky recruited Russian Jews from New York's Russian Jewish immigrant population in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and he trained them to be revolutionary. The majority were Cohens, Levs, Levisons, Shimons, Semyons, and Shimashons. On March 27th, 1917, Trotsky and his 300 well-trained Jewish communists from Manhattan's Lower East Side boarded the Norwegian steamliner for a journey that brought them to St. Petersburg in Russia. Their purpose was to establish a Marxist government under the leadership of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, who were all Jews. Before departing, Jacob Schiff, a Levite, gave this group $20 million in gold bullion to fund the Russian Revolution. So, the royal family, the Tsar and the Tsarina, they flee, but they were pursued by the Jewish communists. With support from inside the Social Democratic Party and many of the Jewish-run Soviets, Lenin, joined by Trotsky from New York, gained the upper hand over the Kerensky government. In August of 1917, the Russian royal family fled to Tobolsk in Siberia, and they stayed at the governor's house until April 1918. They'd hoped to escape to England, but of course, King George, who was a Romanov cousin, didn't give them any refuge or safe passage because of all the Jewish pressure in Parliament in Westminster. On April 22nd, 1918, the Jew, Yakov Sergeyevich, first president of the Soviet Union, sent his aide, the Jew Yankel Yakovlev, to Tobolsk to persuade Tsar Nicholas II to agree to sanction the Brest-Litovsk peace treaty. Tsar Nicholas, of course, refused, for he considered the treaty to be an eternal disgrace to Mother Russia. He did, though, agree to return to Moscow, as he was told that the Germans were willing to grant him asylum. They got as far as Ekaterinburg in the Urals, where the train was halted by the regional Soviets, which were dominated by 4 Jews: Goloshkin, Sarakov, Voykov, and Smirlatov. These 4 communist Jews appointed the Jew Yakov Yurovsky, son of a local Jewish ex-convict, as head of the local Sheka, which is the Soviet secret police, and this was in Ekaterinburg. Now, Yurovsky was given the assignment to imprison, plan, and carry out the assassination of the Russian royal family. Now, the Jew Yurovsky brought the Russian royal family to a former house of a wealthy Jewish merchant named Iplyatov, now made into a prison for the Tsar and the Tsarina and his family. It should be noted that this town, Ekaterinburg, was named after Saint Catherine the Great, but it was renamed Serlovtovsk in 1924 in honor of Jacob Serlovtov, who gave the final order to execute the Russian royal family. Now we go to July 1918. You'll find out why I'm telling you all this. The Jew Yurovsky dismissed all the Russian soldiers who were guarding the Tsar, except for Pavel Mendelvel, a Sheka Jewish spy. Yurovsky replaced the loyal to the Tsar Russian soldiers with Jewish communist assassins from Hungary. That they're Jewish communists from Hungary, we know that because their scribbling on the walls indicates that when we've looked today back in that area. On July 15th, 1918, 2 representatives of the Soviet Extraordinary Commission, one of them, another Jew, Philip Golkashin, came to the Iplyatov house with an order from the Jew Yakov Yurovsky to execute the Russian royal family. These were all Levites and Simeonites. On July 17th, 1918, about midnight, Yurovsky brought Tsar and Tsarina Nicholas and Alexandria and their 4 daughters, their son Alexei, the maid, the doctor, the cook, and the waiter to the basement. The Tsar carried the heir, Alexei, in his arms, and they were told that they were to pose for a group picture. The Jewish assassins, Medev, Nichon, Yeremov, and Vagonov, were waiting. Medev claimed that he was outside, of course, at the time of the execution because his guilty conscience years later shamed his lying tongue. Now, Yurovsky then pulled out his revolver and pointed it directly at the Tsar's head and fired. The Tsar Nicholas II died instantly. Next, he shot Tsarina Alexandria as she made the sign of the cross. Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia were shot next. Then Demidnodov, the maid, survived the first volley, so the Jewish Shecher assassins decided to bayonet her 30 times. Alexei, the Tsar's son, was heir and was still in the arms of the Tsar and was alive. The Jew Yarovsky stepped up, fired 2 shots into the boy's ear, and all the members of the Tsar's family were lying on the floor with many wounds in their bodies. The blood was running in the streams, and 3 years later, the USSR was born from this Levite, Simeonite, Bolshevik conspiracy. Why do I tell you all that? To tell you all this. Putin, the Russians, and the Syrians are sick of it. They know this stuff, and they're sick of it. Putin isn't going to fold. The Syrians aren't going to fold. We have sold out to the Bolsheviks, to the New World Order, to the globalists, and Putin knows his history. He went through it. He was with the secret police. He knows this. They've come out of it. The Russians aren't going this route. They're not going to capitulate to the Bolshevik bankers of the Rothschilds, which are funding our government. The Syrians aren't going to capitulate. And our silly media of CNN and MSNBC is painting Syria out to be the enemy, the Russians to be the enemy, when in fact they're most probably the 2 safest places in the world that you could be right now, because what we are has been surrounded and taken over by the enemy from within. It's a Bolshevik revolution that was financed by Wall Street, and now we're dealing with it. And everyone's asleep because they don't know their history. Putin knows his history. Especially, brethren, since the meteor. Oh, it's insane. I mean, I can't believe that people don't think. The meteor which struck the city of Chelyabinsk back in the beginning of, was it the beginning of this year? All right, it was February. The meteor which struck the city of Chelyabinsk in Russia earlier this year was actually a clandestine American's weapons test. The sonic boom was also felt in Cuba. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had been trying to reach Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov all day to warn him that if the Russians didn't get on board with what the Bolsheviks and the New World Order are doing, that they were going to get a warning. And do you know, we're all asleep in our beds, and we don't realize how close it is. Because do you know what Putin did? He sent up 2. Not 1. He sent up 2 Tu-95 Bear H bombers carrying nuclear weapons over the Pacific coast. And does the media report it? It's insane. But they had to be intercepted by 2 F-15 jets because of a meteor. I'm thankful that the Statesman Journal is now this thick, because the New York Times, the Statesman Journal, MSNBC, they are dinosaurs, and in 10 years, they're not even going to be around because they're not telling truth. It's a bunch of lies. Thankfully, we can go and find out what's really happening, but nobody's going to speak about it on the box or in the fish wrappers. Do you realize how close we were? Because they were trying to put the screws to Putin by doing an American's weapons test. And why did they pick that city? And the media's like, oh, it was a bolide meteor. Well, it was a plasma explosion of a bolide meteor. Kind of sounds highbrow, right? Enough to pacify me. I can continue to suck my thumb. No, it wasn't an explosion of a bolide meteor. It was Putin sending up an ABM-3 Gazelle missile, an anti-ballistic missile, to shoot the bloody thing down. The US weapon was intercepted by the air defense complex at Yermaka village near the Russian city of Chelyabinsk. And why did the weapons test happen in Chelyabinsk? Because Chelyabinsk is the home of Russia's top secret research facility for nuclear weapons testing. It's insane. I can't believe this stuff. I just don't know. I mean, I just wonder sometimes what is going on in the world. I wonder why Yahweh has me teaching the Bible and this stuff. I just don't know.
Where'd you get what's your source?
I have so many. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I can. It's crazy. So, what I do believe, brethren, is I believe that we are now in what the biblical definition of Yaakov's trouble in the end of the age. I do. Now, this could be the first trouble or the second. I don't know. How long is Yaakov's trouble? It's 21 years. I don't believe in the imminent return of Yeshua because Rav Shaliach Shaul taught me not to believe that in Thessalonians. He warned them, he admonished them not to believe. He's going to come tomorrow. Oh, he's going to come in May. Didn't we have that like a couple of years ago? Right. It's not. Can the two sets of 21 years be correlated to the 42 months of the Great Tribulation? Yes. It's a time of preparation. It is not a time of play right now. It's not. It's not a time of telling stories at church. It's not a time of me building frilly word pictures. Those days are over. Thankfully, they are. I can't stomach it anymore. The time is for action. The time isn't to go out there and play oneg and silliness and let's all grab a flag and dance the hooper or whatever they call it. The time is action. We need to be building trenches. We need to be planting vineyards. We need to be sowing seeds in more ways than one, and crops, and preparing for the days and years ahead in our country of exile. We do. We truly do. We need to take account. We need to look where we're living. We need to make preparations because, brethren, it's an amazing time that we live in. But we have to do our due diligence in the Word. Because I believe this week's Torah portion is an admonition for us to be Ephraim on the walls, sounding the alarm. Sounding the alarm. Because the Bible tells us that we are living in an age of wonder, but only to those who have ears to hear. Otherwise, you know what? You'll say, what is black? Well, it's really white. What is up? It's really down. And everybody will be confused. And that will be the essence of Yaakov's trouble. Confusion. And like Sister started off the message, a double-minded man, all unstable. So let's look for stability. And when we see Putin, Bashar Assad, and we see the things going on, and you wonder why they're taking a stand against us, I'm afraid that the America that you all love, that all you were raised to think is now not what you're presently in. It has been taken over. I am an American citizen. I love this country as much as you. But my dreams of coming to this country were dreams like the first pioneers. I mean, my greatest dream was to take the Queen Mary from Southampton and come into New York Harbor and stand on the brow of the ship and sing. I mean, I have all these wonderful visions too. But you know, this country has been hijacked hijacked from within. And it started a long, long time ago, brethren. So amazing things. Questions, comments, kind of wild again, but never a dull moment in the Torah. Amen? An outline of the plan of action. The most important thing, of course, is to be spiritually prepared. In your Ruach, by the Ruach HaKodesh, is to be spiritually prepared to realize that we are going to go through a time of trouble. You have to make that. You have to make that preparation in your Ruach to strengthen the inner man and the inner woman. Strengthen the Ruach. That's the most important thing. By prayer, study, fasting. Spiritual things are first. Now the carnal things are second. Get out of the cities if you can. Live off the land. Do what Abraham did. Drop a well. Get some cattle. Learn to live in that environment. Have an army of fighting men in case Amalek takes up the rear. Get off the grid. Man. Be the gray man. Don't join a mob. Exodus Shemot 21. Because they'll round you up and put you in a FEMA camp before you know it. So, be the gray man and be ready to flee from your exile when the time is near. Make the preparations. But I think mostly it's here and in here. And then be able to become unshackled from the things of the world. Let them not hold us. Let them not hold us. We're to be in the world but not of the world. And the most important thing, share this message of Yeshua. But not the greasy gospel, the true gospel that Yeshayahu, Isaiah the prophet, spoke of, which is a gospel of hope. It's a gospel of preparation, but it is also a gospel of war. So these are the days. Raise up your family. Love your husband, love your wife, and love your children, and have more children. And more children. And plant more vineyards and plant more fields. Get off the fluoride, get off the pharmacia, get off the drugs. Wow, what a trip. I mean, there may be a few, there'll always be a remnant, but the majority, what you've got there are Khazarian converts, which happened back in, there was a... Yeah, the Khazarian converted to Judaism. And then they became Ashkenazi. And if you look, Ashkenaz was a son of Japheth. Theodore Herzl and all those were in the occult. And the Zionism that you see today is not biblical Zionism. The Israel today is a national... I mean, a lot of the Palestinians, they're actually... They're the Felachim. The Felachim were the Romans, when the Romans came and took a city, they didn't take the people captive with them. They plundered the city, they took all the relics, and they took them back to Rome. And then they put in a prefect to manage the peoples, Pontius Pilate. So you've got all of these Jews that were in the land at the time of 70 of the Common Era. Okay? They didn't leave. They weren't dispersed. They were there. And they were called felachim. They were migrant workers that were attached to the land. But later on in 680, Islam came, and then we had Saladin, and they imported what was called the Jahiz tax. So they taxed highly these poor Jewish migrant workers that had been there for 6 centuries. And they couldn't pay the tax, so they were going to lose the land, which is the birthright, right? So what did they to do so they wouldn't have to pay the Jehiz tax? These Jews converted to Islam. Even David Ben-Gurion, who was a historian before he was the prime minister of Israel, acknowledged that the Palestinians back in 1946, 47, at that time, that they were the original Jews of the land. What is up is down. What's black is white. It's insane.
But if they're no longer worshiping Yehovah,
Right?
then would they not?
But there are many, many, many Palestinians that are Christians, that love Yeshua.
But they can't say it, right?
Huh?
Are they in hiding?
Well, they used to be, Bethlehem used to be a huge enclave, and now it's been taken over. So you can't believe what the media is telling you, and you can't believe what the state of Israel is telling you. It's insane. It's wild stuff.